Hi everyone, and welcome to Truth Over News. In the last several weeks, we've watched the fabricated narrative that Joe Biden had nothing to do with Hunter's business fall completely apart. And concurrent with that collapse came exposure for those who were pushing that lie to the American public under false pretenses. This week, we're going to take a special look at how that narrative collapsed on the head of Joe Biden's lead defender, Democrat Congressman Dan Goldman, and examine his not so surprising involvement with Hunter Biden during Trump's first impeachment hearing. Goldman has been an obnoxious, longtime protector for Joe Biden, demonstrably lying in spectacular fashion, even as evidence proving Joe's complicity and guilt spilled forth in a fashion that's difficult for any rational person to ignore or dispute. But defend, dispute, and lie, Goldman did, until he found himself boxed into a corner he could no longer talk his way out of. On July 31st, Hunter's longtime business partner, Devon Archer, testified that Joe Biden had been at dinners, meetings, and on conference calls with foreign business associates of Hunter at least 20 different times. In some respects, it didn't even matter what was discussed. Bringing the Vice President of the United States into a call with your corrupt business partners is the very definition of influence peddling. Hunter, Joe, and all their business partners knew perfectly well what was implied by having his father on the phone call. We went from Joe never talked to Hunter about his business to Joe never talked to Hunter's business partners. Now it became Joe talked routinely with Hunter's business associates, but it was just about the weather. This new revelation from Archer marked a major shift in Democrat talking points and the public narrative. It also put Goldman on the defensive.
That it was part of the daily conversations that Hunter Biden had with his father, and it was and sounded like most of the time now President Biden didn't even know who the people he was at dinner. He was just asked to say hello. And he would, talk about the way he described it several times. They asked over and over and over. He described what the weather was.
He said specifically that he's never talked to them. Doesn't this contradict him?
I don't know what his comment is, and if we're gonna, I don't think that's what he said.
Despite the best efforts from Goldman, Archer's testimony was deeply damaging to Joe Biden. Archer even described how a fictitious narrative was created by Hunter's D.C. lobbyists directly in front of Joe Biden's firing of Shokin, that the firing of that Ukrainian prosecutor would be bad for Burisma and its corrupt owners. Now we know that in the months directly preceding Biden's firing of Shokin, a task force of State, Treasury, and Justice Department officials had declared that Ukraine and Shokin had made adequate progress on anti-corruption reforms and deserved the new $1 billion U.S. loan guarantee. Goldman, who was a flustered mess after Archer's testimony, tried to regroup by lying about what Archer actually said, ignoring the crucial part about the narrative creation that gave cover for Joe Biden's firing of Shokin. Instead, Goldman quickly ran out to the talk shows in damage control mode, falsely claiming that Archer had testified that Burisma had Shokin under control and didn't want Shokin to be fired, despite emails from Burisma to Hunter asking for help in closing Shokin's investigation.
The only evidence is that Joe Biden's official actions ran counter to Hunter Biden's interests, because this witness said that Burisma believed they had the corrupt prosecutor general, and I quote what the witness said, under control, and they did not want him to be fired because that might mean that Burisma and their president would get investigated, and yet that's exactly what Joe Biden advocated.
Indeed, it was Goldman who coined the phrase illusion of access to describe the many interactions that Joe Biden had with Hunter's business partners, described by Archer during his testimony. According to Goldman, there wasn't any access or influence peddling at all, just the illusion of it. Joe Biden had done nothing wrong. Joe Biden was just an innocent pawn in Hunter's overblown efforts to invoke his father's name during his various business schemes. And poor Hunter just got a little overzealous in his misguided promotion of his ties to his father without actually doing anything illegal. Perhaps we should ask Joe's brother, James Biden, if his promised Decatur of a wealth of introductions and business opportunities at the highest of levels was also an illusion. In the short term, Goldman tactic worked. Every possible corporate media organization ran with the heading of illusion of access, and they all claimed this came directly from Archer himself. But of course, this was all a lie. It wasn't Archer who said there was an illusion of access. It was a fabrication created by Goldman.
What he testified to yesterday completely absolves Joe Biden of any involvement in Hunter Biden's business world. And notwithstanding whatever alleged smoke Chairman Comer says there is, the witness testimony was very clear that Joe Biden was not involved in any of their business dealings. Joe Biden got no benefit. Joe Biden did not change any of his actions for the benefit of his son in any way, shape, or form. That Hunter may have, quote, promoted the illusion of influence on his father, but the witness was very clear that it was an illusion.
Joe Biden knew that his son was on the board of this company that was being hassled by the prosecutor whose firing he was calling for.
Right.
Yeah.
Things became problematic for Goldman after House Republicans released the Archer transcript, allowing everyone to see exactly how the illusion of access hoax was planted by Goldman. Indeed, it was Goldman who asked Archer about the illusion of access. It was his term, not Archer's. Archer actually told Goldman that was a mischaracterization and not entirely fair. There was real access. There were real touch points, contact points, and communications. Goldman has more reason than most to be defensive of Biden and nervous over his personal involvement. Before he leveraged his way into Congress, Goldman was the lead counsel for House Democrats during the entirety of Trump's first impeachment. And it was Goldman who went after Trump for his phone call with the new Ukrainian president when Trump began asking questions about Joe Biden's involvement in Ukraine. And it was during those impeachment proceedings that Goldman falsely conflated Ukraine's earlier and corrupt prosecutor, Vitaly Yarema, who took the bribe that Goldman references, with his successor, Viktor Shokin, who came in to clean up Yarema's mess and whom Biden got fired.
When he said that there were problems because Zlochevsky paid a bribe, the head of Burisma, in order to get out from under the prosecution, that was exactly the type of conduct that Vice President Biden wanted to shut down in Ukraine. That was exactly the type of non-anti-corruption policies that Vice President Biden was objecting to using the official policy.
Goldman did exactly the same thing both during and after Archer's interview, conflate Shokin with the corrupt Yarema. He had to in order to cover for Joe Biden because he already knew what Joe did in Ukraine and why he did it. All of which goes a long way to explaining Goldman's more recent and obvious panic. Despite all the lies he's told and all the narratives he's attempted to set, Goldman understood everything about Biden's actions in Ukraine the entire time. At one point, Goldman did come under some pressure himself during the impeachment hearings. In a clip that most have either forgotten about or haven't seen, Goldman was forced under questioning from Representative Doug Collins to admit twice that Joe Biden had indeed engaged in a quid pro quo when he leveraged taxpayer funds to force Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko to fire Shokin.
I'm leaving here in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired. Did he ask for something, request something, and hold something of value?
He did. George Kent testified that was...
I think I'll do what you did. George Kent testified this. I'm asking about not George Kent. I'm asking about this question.
Right, but it's important context.
It's not. Answer this question. Did he or did he not? Either Joe Biden's a liar, telling a story to make people impressed, or he actually did this. Which is it?
He did it pursuant to U.S. official policy.
So he did it in withholding actual dollars, actual thing, holding this out there. So Joe Biden, of everybody that we discussed about, is the only one that's done a quid pro quo. He's the only one that's used taxpayer dollars to actually threaten a foreign government.